Thomas arrived before dawn on his first day at the castle garrison. The sky was still dark, and a faint chill clung to the air. He carried his new kit lightly on his back, but his heart felt heavy with nervous hope. Beyond the tall stone walls, he could hear the faint clink of armor and the low murmur of soldiers preparing for morning duty. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, just inside the gate. Rows of guards stood at attention. Their polished helms caught the lantern light in bright flares. Each man wore a uniform of deep blue cloth trimmed with silver braid. They held their spears straight and their faces blank, as if carved from stone. Thomas felt small among them, but he raised his chin and found the place the sergeant had pointed out. He saw Marcus before he saw anyone else. The older guard stood at the end of the line. His tunic was faded almost too gray, and the silver braid had dark spots where it had worn thin. A square patch of mismatched cloth covered a tear at his shoulder. The patch was a different blue, brighter and newer than the rest of his coat. Thomas wondered why Marcus had not replaced the whole uniform. The sergeant had given brand new coats to every recruit except this one man. Thomas remembered his home village, where every family took pride in its oldest cloak or coat. They patched it again and again until it felt like a part of their life story. Maybe Marcus felt the same way. Yet around him, some of the younger guards whispered and snickered. They tapped their polished spears against the stone floor, casting quick glances at the patch. It was a small sound, but Thomas heard it clearly in the hush before dawn. When the sergeant shouted the first command, the line moved as one. Thomas tried to keep his posture straight, but he wobbled on his feet. He gripped his spear tightly, worried his hands might shake. Behind him, someone pushed past, muttering something he could not catch. He heard a soft laugh. Thomas glanced over and saw two men leaning close to each other. One pointed at Marcus's shoulder, and the other whispered and then pointed at Thomas. Thomas turned back quickly. Marcus looked ahead without a flicker of reaction. He did not bend or shift his feet. He moved with quiet calm, as if each morning drill was simply part of a longer routine. Although he was older, his back was straight and his head held high. His hands clasped his spear at waist level and he stood firm. Thomas felt a tug of respect for any man who could stand so still under those whispers. During the next command, the soldiers marched through the courtyard in silence. The sound of their boots echoed off the walls. Thomas tried to match their pace, but stumbled once. A guard beside him snorted. Thomas steadied himself, refusing to let his cheeks burn. Marcus passed by without faltering. His steps were slow, but sure, Thomas wondered if the older guard had ever made a mistake in drill. After the march, they halted before a wide wooden door. It led into a room where the sergeant taught them the code of the guard. Thomas hoped for a chance to learn quickly. He wanted to prove himself and find his place. Behind him, the others shifted their stare from Marcus back to Thomas. He tried to focus on the sergeant's words, but part of his mind kept drifting back to that bright patch on a dull tunic. He imagined stories behind it. Why had Marcus chosen that bit of cloth? Was it a gift? A memory? The sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft pastels. Light streamed across the courtyard, warming the stones. The sergeant spoke of loyalty and of honor. He described how every guard belonged to a lineage that dated back centuries. The words carried weight, but a quiet question grew in Thomas's heart. If Marcus belonged to a proud line, why did his coat look shameful to the others? At the end of the lesson, the sergeant called them to practice spear technique. Thomas held his spear awkwardly and mimicked the sergeant's movements. The metal tip caught the morning light and gleamed sharply. He swung it in a simple arc, careful not to hit the mossy wall behind him. He felt the weight of the weapon settle into his hand. Marcus stepped forward next. The older guard moved slowly, raising the spear above his head and then guiding it. Down in a steady line, when he finished, Marcus stood with his feet apart, spear resting at his side. He did not breathe heavily. He offered no show of strength beyond calm control. Thomas watched the ease of Marcus's motion and felt a knot loosen in his chest. He realized this man carried more skill than any brand new recruit could claim. One of the young guards called out a joke and swung his spear casually as if dancing. The spear's tip scraped the cobblestone. The young man laughed at his own motion, but his clumsy swing sent the spear spinning. It clinked harmlessly against the wall, but the sound rang like a bell. The sergeant's voice cut through the air. The young guard froze, ashamed. Marcus stepped forward and picked up the fallen spear. He offered it back with his steady hand. The young soldier took it and bowed his head. Marcus said nothing. He turned and walked back to his place in line. The younger guards shifted uncomfortably. They did not whisper then. They watched Marcus's easy strength and wondered what he knew that they did not. Thomas felt a moment of pride in Marcus's simple action. He felt connected to the older guard. He dared to hope that Marcus might one day become his teacher. The sergeant ended the practice, and the guards formed a circle. He looked at each man and praised those who followed commands well. His gaze lingered on Marcus, and Thomas held his breath. The sergeant gave a small nod. Marcus had met every test with quiet skill. When the hour ended, the guards relaxed. Thomas saw them exchange calls and friendly jabs. Marcus removed his helmet and ran a hand through his graying hair. He did not smile, but his eyes had a gentle warmth. Thomas took a step forward. He nodded. Respectfully, Marcus nodded back, a faint lift of his brow. Thomas felt a spark of friendship between them. As the recruits prepared to leave the courtyard for their chores, Thomas gathered his courage. He approached Marcus and asked a question in a low voice. "Sir, may I ask about your tunic?" Marcus looked down at his own shoulder, where the patch showed bright against the worn cloth. He studied it for a long moment, then placed a hand gently on Thomas's arm. In time, Marcus said softly. His voice was kind and measured. "First you learn to stand firm in your own place." Thomas nodded, feeling both satisfied and eager. He watched Marcus turn away to join the others. A new respect grew in him. He would learn more about this man. That night, Thomas lay on his cot and thought of Marcus's old tunic and his steady steps. He thought of the silent strength he had shown and how the other guards had paused their teasing. Thomas realized that courage sometimes came in quiet acts, not loud shouts. He resolved to prove himself as a guard worthy of standing beside Marcus. He slept with a light heart, ready for whatever dawn might bring. ChatGPT said. The sun climbed higher, and the garrison yard grew warm under its light. Thomas joined the guards for the midday drill. The sergeant called out commands in a firm voice. Each soldier moved with precision, planting boots and swinging spears in perfect rhythm. Thomas kept his eyes on Marcus, hoping the older guard would walk with the same steady calm he had shown at dawn. As they formed a tight line, Thomas felt a tap on his shoulder, turned to see one of the young guards, Peter, leaning close with a grin. Peter whispered, "Look at his coat. It's falling apart." Thomas followed Peter's gaze. Marcus stood at attention, shoulders squared, but his tunic looked tired and faded. The patch at his shoulder glowed in the sunlight like a missing star. The spears rose and fell in unison. The metal tips flashed. Stray breeze carried the soft sound of fabric rubbing against fabric. The other recruits shifted their weight and stared at the patch. Some pointed with quick glances. Others snickered softly. Thomas felt a tight knot in his chest. He wished Peter would leave him alone, but the laughter flowed around him like cold water. The sergeant called advance. Forward boots echoed on the cobblestones. Thomas found his pace and matched his breathing to the drumbeat of footsteps. Behind him, Peter leaned over and jabbed his elbow toward Marcus. Peter's whisper reached Thomas. "How long do you think he's been wearing that thing?" The question hung in the air, and Thomas did not answer. Marcus moved with measured steps. He did not stumble. He kept his eyes straight ahead, focused somewhere beyond the courtyard walls. Thomas realized Marcus's calm was like a wall against a storm. Every snicker and glance bounced off it without shaking him. Thomas admired that strength, but he also felt ashamed for letting the mocking disturb him. The sergeant called a halt. Soldiers froze, spears held upright. The midday sun beat down on them. Thomas felt sweat prick at his forehead. He swallowed once, then turned his head and caught Marcus's eye. Marcus's face was calm, almost kind. He gave a small nod. Thomas held the gaze, feeling a spark of connection. Then a loud laugh cut through the quiet. One of the recruits, James, set down his spear and pointed at Marcus's shoulder. The others saw it too, and the laughter grew louder. James called, "Out, hey old man, your coat needs a new tailor?" The mockery rolled over the yard like thunder. Marcus did not move. Only the silver braid at his chest trembled with each chuckle. The corporal, a man eager to show authority, strode forward. He was younger than Marcus by many years, but he liked to act in charge. He stopped in front of Marcus and stared down at the patch. The corporal's face darkened. With a sharp nod, he barked, "Fall out!" Marcus bowed his head and stepped to the side. His spear lowered slowly, touching the ground. The corporal turned to the rest and said, "Let the old man sit this one out." Gasps ran through the line. Thomas felt a hot flush of anger rise in him. The corporal's order was unfair and cruel. Marcus watched without a flicker of protest. He did not try to argue or explain. He simply obeyed and walked away with slow, even steps. Thomas could feel the eyes of every guard on Marcus's back. When Marcus reached the edge of the yard, he paused and turned his head slightly. His voice when he spoke was calm and clear. "Carry on," he said quietly to Thomas. Thomas nodded, voice caught in his throat. Wished he had courage to speak up, but he clenched his jaw and stepped forward to fill Marcus's place. The sergeant resumed the drill. Thomas took Marcus's spot at the end of the line, felt the weight of responsibility press on him. He tried to move as Marcus would, but his arms wobbled. Felt every eye in the yard on him. The sergeant barked an order, and Thomas nearly dropped the spear. He caught it just in time, but the recoil jarred his wrist. A sharp pain shot up his arm. The sergeant frowned and called out, "Get it right, or you'll be next to fall out." Thomas's cheeks burned. He gripped the spear tighter, determined not to let it slip again. He watched the other soldiers and tried to match their rhythmic swing. When he managed to keep pace, he felt a small triumph. But his victory was small. He glanced again at Marcus, standing alone by the wall. Marcus did not join any group. He stood with hands folded, his back to the courtyard. His tunic rippled slightly in the breeze. Thomas noticed how the patch clung to the coat as if it had weathered many seasons like a loyal friend. The drill ended at last, and the soldiers lowered their spears. The sergeant dismissed them with a quick nod. Thomas released a breath he did not know he held. He turned to look for Marcus, but the older guard was already walking away. Peter and James fell in step behind Marcus, calling out insults. "Need a fresh patch yet?" One shouted. "Maybe next time we'll fix your boots too." They laughed and trotted after Marcus's slow pace. Thomas caught up to the pair, stepped between them, his chest tight. "Stop it," he said, his voice trembling with anger. Peter looked at him, surprise flashing in his eyes. James sneered. "Why? Are you the old guard's defender now?" Thomas looked from Peter to James. "If you have nothing better to do, then mind your own affairs," he said firmly. Peter opened his mouth to reply, but James grabbed his arm. "Leave him," James said. "Let's go find something else to laugh at." They turned away, muttering under their breath, and left Thomas standing alone in the yard. Thomas watched their backs, chest heavy with shame and relief at the same time. He scanned the yard and saw Marcus at the far gate. Marcus stood tall, silhouetted against the stone. Thomas hurried across the cobblestones, moving past the other guards, who gave him curious looks. He caught up just as Marcus placed a hand on the heavy wooden gate. "Sir Thomas," said, breathing hard. Marcus turned and offered a gentle smile. "Thank you," Thomas said, "for handling that so quietly." Marcus shook his head. "There are times when quiet is best," he said. "Their words cannot wound if you do not let them."
Thomas
nodded, though he still felt a dull ache in his chest. Marcus glanced down at his tunic. "This coat has seen more seasons than most of those young men," he said softly. "It has borne my mistakes and my triumphs. I will wear it until I know. Longer can." Thomas looked at the patch again, thinking of what it must mean to Marcus. He imagined stitches made by a loved one, carried cloth from a distant home. He saw a life lived fully, marked by every repair. "Will you teach me?" Thomas asked, surprising himself with the question. "Not today," Marcus said with a small laugh. "First, you must learn to stand firm when others try to knock you down." Thomas looked at Marcus's calm face, felt determined. He would learn that quiet courage. He would prove himself worthy to stand beside the old guard. The noon bell rang from the keep, its deep tone echoing across the yard. Marcus straightened his shoulders. He gave Thomas a slight nod and turned away. Thomas watched his back, remembering every lesson he had given, every step he had taught. The yard fell silent as the soldiers paused for the midday meal. Thomas picked up his spear and followed the others toward the mess hall. As he walked, he felt Marcus's words echo in his mind. He realized that respect and honor came not from a spotless coat, but from the steady strength of character. He thought of the patch on Marcus's tunic and saw it now as a badge of experience, not shame. Thomas vowed that he would carry that lesson with him, patching his own character with kindness and courage, no matter how hard the world might try to tear him apart. The next morning, the sun had barely risen when a horn sounded from the keep. Its deep call rolled across the courtyard. The soldiers looked up from their chores and assembled in silence. Thomas set aside his broom and ran to join the ranks. He felt his heart thump in his chest. Today, he knew would be different. At the front gate, a carriage drawn by 2 black horses came to a slow stop. The wheels made deep grooves in the gravel. The guards snapped to attention. Thomas clenched his spear, eyes fixed on the carriage. Door. It opened with a soft creak, and General Aldridge stepped out. He wore a dark uniform trimmed in gold, and his boots shone like mirrors. His cape billowed behind him even in the still air. General Aldridge walked with long strides, shoulders straight, head high. Right! He carried himself with quiet power. The soldiers watched his every move. Thomas stood at the corner of the line, hands gripping his spear tightly. His palms were damp. He remembered Marcus's words. Hold firm, even when others shake. He took a slow breath and let his shoulders relax. The general paused at the center of the ranks. He raised a hand and looked at each soldier. His gaze was sharp, as if he could see through armor to a man's true spirit. Thomas felt the weight of that gaze and stood as still as he could. Next to him, the corporal straightened his back, chest out, chin up. Even Peter and James looked uneasy under the general's stare. General Aldridge walked slowly down the line, inspecting uniforms, weapons, and faces. He tapped the spears with his gloved fist and nodded at the men, who held them correctly. Stopped in front of Marcus, the older guard stood alone at the end of the line, his faded tunic and bright patch catching the early light. The general's brow creased as he reached out and touched the patch. The courtyard fell silent. No bird sang, no breath stirred. Every soldier held still. Even the wind stilled, as if the world waited. Thomas leaned forward, trying to see what the general saw. The patch was just cloth sewn over a tear. But something in the general's eyes changed when he touched it. General Aldridge stepped closer and knelt down. He studied the threads and colors. His face grew softer. Behind him, the corporal frowned. He did not understand why the general wasted time on a humble guard's coat. The general pulled gently at the patch, revealing a worn piece of cloth beneath. The old cloth carried an embroidered crest, a symbol of honor. The general rose, slowly turning to face the soldiers. His voice was quiet, but when he spoke, every word rang like a bell. This emblem, he said, pointing to the hidden crest, marks a man who fought and bled for this kingdom. He held up the torn cloth. This guard served at the siege of Pine Hill 15 years ago. He sheltered the wounded when the walls fell, carried messages through fire and smoke, and he saved the lives of dozens. A murmur ran through the ranks. The soldiers leaned forward, as if drawn by a strong wind. Thomas felt goosebumps prick his skin. He glanced at Marcus. The older guard did not bow or stare at the ground. He stood tall, eyes on the general, expression calm. Thomas realized Marcus's silence was not weakness, but the quiet strength of a man at peace with his past. General. Aldridge stepped back and folded his arms. He looked down at Marcus with respect shining in his eyes. Then he turned to the other. Soldiers, I ask you now, who among you has earned a place in battle by courage alone? Who has carried a patch of honor as a badge of survival? Who will stand beside this man when the kingdom calls? No one spoke. The courtyard was as quiet as a grave. Thomas felt his heart pound so loud he feared it might burst. But he did not speak. He was new and still learning. He took comfort in the steady beat of his own resolve. General Aldrich raised his voice. "Let every man here remember this texture of cloth and the strength behind it. Let no one mock a worn uniform again. For a man's worth is not in the newness of his coat, but in the courage of his heart." He paused, letting the words sink into the stone walls. Then he turned to Marcus. "Guard Marcus," he said, "you have earned more than a patch. You have earned the gratitude of every living soul in this kingdom." He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small box. He opened it to reveal a new tunic baja, golden crest, shining and bright. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they glistened with moisture. He bowed his head and knelt. Thomas felt tears prick his own eyes. The other soldiers bowed too, though some tried to hide their eyes. General Aldrich handed Marcus the badge. "Wear this with pride," he said. "Tell every man that honor may fade with time, but true deeds never rust." Marcus rose and pressed the badge to his chest. The sun caught the gold and sent a beam across the courtyard. The guards shielded their eyes, awed by the light. Thomas heard someone whisper, "By the king's grace." Then the general stepped forward and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Rise, Captain Marcus," he said, his voice warm. "Your steady service earns you this new rank." A cheer broke the silence, soft at first, then louder as more soldiers joined in. Thomas found his voice and shouted with the rest. The cheer rolled across the courtyard, lifting every spirit. Marcus smiled, a simple curve of his lips, but it shone brighter than any gold. After the cheer died down, General Aldrich addressed the whole garrison. His words were simple but filled with purpose, spoke of duty, of loyalty, and of the strength found in unity. He reminded them that every man and woman in the guard carried a story, some marked by scars, some by triumphs. I said that they must respect each other's paths, for a guard's shield is only as strong as its weakest link. When he finished, General nodded once, then turned and walked back to his carriage. He climbed in and waved farewell. The horses responded, and the carriage rolled away, leaving dust in its wake. The soldiers watched until it disappeared through the gate. Then they turned back to Marcus, who stood at the center of the courtyard, his new badge gleaming. Thomas moved forward and joined the other guards around Marcus. They patted his back and slung arms over his shoulders. Marcus laughed, a low, warm sound that filled the space. Thomas reached out and touched the badge. It felt solid and smooth. He looked up at Marcus's face, shining with pride in that moment. Thomas understood what Marcus had carried in his heart all these years. He understood that the patch had been a silent story waiting for a listener. He realized that every man had his own patch, some hidden, some bright. And it was the duty of comrades to learn those stories and stand together as the guards dispersed for the afternoon meal. Thomas walked beside Marcus. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but chose only one. "Sir," he said softly, "may I now hear more of your story?" Marcus glanced at him and smiled. "In time," he said gently. "Stories are best shared in moments when both hearts are ready." He patted Thomas on the shoulder and led him toward the mess hall. Thomas walked, with pride in his step, ready to learn from the man who wore his past on his sleeve. The sunlight warmed the courtyard as the guards filed back to their duties. Thomas walked beside Marcus, still feeling the pride from the morning's ceremony. He wanted to hear Marcus's story, but he also knew that a man's past was not always easy to share. He decided to wait for the right moment. Later that afternoon, the garrison gathered in the training hall. The walls were tall and made of smooth stone. Wooden beams crossed the ceiling, and torches lined the walls. Marcus stood near the center, dressed now in his new tunic badge. The golden crest caught the torchlight and cast a soft glow. The other guards formed a loose circle around him. Thomas found a place close by. Marcus took a deep breath and looked around at the faces. Some were new recruits like Thomas. Others were seasoned soldiers. He cleared his throat softly. "You asked to know my story," he said, voice steady. "I will tell you about the siege of Pine Hill. It happened 15 years ago." He paused and met Thomas's eyes. Thomas nodded, encouraging him to continue. Marcus began by describing the kingdom's border at Pine Hill. Pine Hill was a small fortress on a rocky ridge, he said. It guarded the pass between the mountains. The walls were high, but the garrison was small. I was a young guard then, not much older than Thomas is now. He smiled at Thomas, who felt a warm rush of excitement. The enemy came in the winter, Marcus continued. They marched through the snow, their banners dark against the white ground. We saw them from the wall, their horses moving slowly in the cold. There were so many that they covered the ridge like a black storm. Thomas listened, imagining long lines of soldiers in the snow. We were outnumbered 10-1, Marcus said, voice low. Our commander urged us to hold fast. He believed the walls would protect us. But the enemy had brought ladders and ropes. They struck at dawn, under a pale red sky. The battle lasted for 3 days. Thomas felt his breath catch. He remembered the soft way Marcus spoke, and he knew the older man had lived through something very hard. Marcus spoke of the first night. The enemy lit torches at the base of the wall, he said. They tried to climb, but our archers sent arrows down. The sky filled with lights and screams. I had never seen fear like that. My hands shook as I loaded my bow. Thomas thought of his own shaky hands with the spear and felt close to Marcus's younger self. On the second day, the battle turned fierce. They broke through one gate, Marcus said quietly. I saw it bend under their weight. They poured in like water through a broken dam. I had to decide. Run or stand. Marcus's eyes darkened for a moment. Thomas leaned forward. He felt Marcus's memory burn in the silent air. I chose to stand, Marcus said. I grabbed a wounded comrade and pulled him to cover. He gasped for air, blood seeping through his tunic. I held him as arrows flew overhead. I pressed bandages to his wound, though my own hands trembled. Thomas felt a tight ache in his chest. He imagined the weight of that moment, the cold stone under Marcus's knees, the wind carrying distant shouts. Marcus paused, looking past the torches to a distant corner of the hall. He seemed to see the past again. I thought we would die there, he whispered, but I held on. I heard a shout. Reinforcements were coming. Our king had sent help. The guards around him shifted, the flicker of torchlight dancing in their eyes. The reinforcements charged up the slope, Marcus said, voice growing stronger. They drove the enemy back, sword meeting sword. The air filled with the clang of steel. We pushed them from the gate, sealed the breach, and turned the tide. By nightfall, the enemy retreated into the forest. Marcus's face glowed with pride and relief. He looked at Thomas. That day taught me 2 things, he said. 1, courage is born in the face of fear. 2, the strength of one man can help a friend, but the strength of many can save a kingdom. Thomas nodded, understanding the lesson in Marcus's words. A young recruit spoke up. Sir Marcus, how did you find the courage to stay? Marcus smiled softly. I remembered why I stood guard in the first place, he said. I remembered my family back home, the people I loved, and the promise I made to protect them. Fear stayed with me, but it no longer ruled me. He looked around. When you feel fear, remember your reason for standing. Let that guide you. The corporal, the same man who had mocked Marcus's tunic, stepped forward. His head was bowed. Forgive me, Captain Marcus, he said. I did not know your story. I did not understand. Marcus shook his head. It takes time to learn, he said kindly. What matters is that you now respect it. The corporal nodded and stepped back, joining the circle of guards around Marcus. Thomas felt his heart swell. He looked at Marcus's patched tunic, though. Now, it was less important. Tan saw not a shameful garment, but a shield of memories. The patch had held that crest safe all these years. Now the crest was free to shine. The afternoon's training began. Marcus led the lesson on shield and spear, guided each guard through the steps he had used at Pine Hill. Thomas watched closely, repeating every movement. He felt stronger with each strike. The other guards followed Marcus's calm pace, and the room rang with the steady beat of wood on wood. During a break, Thomas found a chance to speak with Marcus. Sir, may I ask about the patch under your new badge? It covered the crest I fought under, he said. I hid it when I returned here. I felt unworthy. I thought I had failed when men died." Thomas frowned. "But you saved many lives," he said.
Marcus.
Nodded. "Yes, but I lost friends too," he said softly. I blamed myself. I removed the crest and wore the patch so no one would ask. I wanted to be judged by tomorrow's work, not yesterday's fame. Thomas's eyes filled with respect. He understood the weight Marcus had carried, the burden of memory and guilt. They continued training until the torches burned low. Afterward, the guards gathered for their evening meal. The long wooden tables were set with bowls of stew and loaves of bread. The hall smelled of herbs and roasting meat. Soldiers ate and spoke in low voices, laughter rising from time to time. At the far end sat Marcus and Thomas. Marcus had a bowl of simple soup. He looked tired but at peace. Thomas sat beside him, spoon in hand. "Sir," Thomas said quietly, "I want to learn more from you." Marcus smiled. "Then stand ready," he said. "Every day brings a lesson." Thomas nodded eagerly. Later that night, Thomas lay in his cot and thought about Marcus's story. He pictured the stones of Pine Hill, the cold wind, the clash of spears. He felt a new resolve. He would carry his own patch, his mistakes and triumphs, and wear it with quiet pride, like Marcus. He drifted to sleep with a calm heart. Across the hall, Marcus sat by his own cot. He held the old crest wrapped in soft cloth. He traced the embroidered lines with his fingers. He remembered faces lost and lives saved. He felt the weight of sorrow and the warmth of gratitude in equal measure. He closed his eyes and whispered a silent thanks for the chance to stand once more as a guard. And so the garrison found new strength in the story of the siege of Pine Hill. Marcus's patch and crest changed from a sign of shame to a symbol of honor. The soldiers learned that a guard's worth lies not in the freshness of his uniform, but in the courage and heart that guide him through every trial. In the days that followed, the courtyard rang with the sounds of training and laughter, and every guard carried a piece of Marcus's story in his own heart. The morning sun touched the high walls of the castle, and Thomas woke with a quiet smile. Today the garrison felt different. Guards spoke with respect and kindness. The patch and the golden crest on Marcus's tunic were not just cloth and metal, they were stories stitched into the heart of the guard. Thomas dressed quickly, washed his face at the trough, and grabbed his spear. He joined the line at the courtyard gate. Marcus stood at the head of the line now. He wore his new badge with pride, but his eyes were gentle, not proud. The guards fell silent as the sergeant called the roll. When he reached Marcus's name, every soldier answered loudly and clearly. Thomas felt a warm glow in his chest. He answered for his own name, with strength he had never known before. The sergeant gave commands, and the line moved as one. Spears rose and fell like waves. Marcus moved smoothly through the formations, guiding with small gestures and calm words. When a recruit missed a step, Marcus paused the line and gently guided the man's feet into place. Thomas watched the care in Marcus's eyes. He thought of the lessons learned at Pine Hill, the strength born of courage and compassion. After drill, the guards gathered to prepare defenses along the southern wall. Scouts had reported a group of bandits near the forest edge. It was a routine task, but today every man approached it with purpose. Thomas helped load oil flasks and sharpen stakes. He passed buckets of sand to Marcus, who placed them at the base of the wall. As they worked, Thomas asked about Marcus's bandaging techniques from the siege. Marcus showed him how to wrap a cloth so it would stay tight without cutting off blood flow. Thomas practiced on a wooden post, learning how small details could make a big difference. When the work was done, the sergeant inspected the defenses. He walked the length of the wall and nodded at each prepared station. At Marcus's station, he paused, looking at the neat stakes and secure buckets. He said, "Well done, Captain Marcus." Each guard straightened at those words. Thomas felt proud to stand beside Marcus, sharing in that praise. The sun climbed higher, and word came that the bandits had slipped away. There would be no battle today, only calm vigilance. The guards broke for midday meal. Thomas sat with Marcus and a few recruits under a shaded portico. They passed around bread, cheese, and boiled eggs. The air smelled of mint from a nearby herb garden. A young guard named Alina, new to the garrison, looked at Marcus's tunic. The bright patch and golden badge caught her eye. "Captain Marcus," she asked softly, "may I hear more of the siege? I want to know what real courage looks like." Marcus smiled and nodded. Between bites of bread, he spoke of his first lesson in battle, to keep his mind steady when fear screamed. He told of a moment when he closed his eyes and remembered home, his mother's gentle voice and his father's strong hands. That memory gave him calm. Thomas watched Elena's wide eyes and saw his own wonder mirrored there. He felt grateful for Marcus's story sharing. He realized that a leader's strength lay in teaching others. Marcus did not hold his stories like weapons. He shared them like warm blankets to comfort and guide. After the meal, the guards trained in small groups. Thomas paired with Elena. Marcus supervised both, moving between them to offer tips. He corrected Thomas's grip, then knelt to adjust Elena's stance. They practiced spear thrusts and blocks. Each movement was precise, flowing. When Elena missed, Marcus clapped gently and showed her again. Thomas felt pride in his own progress and joy in helping Elena learn. Late afternoon brought a surprise visit from the castle's healer, Sister Agnes. She carried a basket of warm stew and herbs for the wounded. The sergeant led her to Marcus, who knelt respectfully. The healer offered her thanks to Marcus for the care he had shown wounded soldiers during the siege. Sister Agnes placed a small silver pin on Marcus's cloak, an emblem of healing and mercy. Marcus's eyes shone with tears as he accepted the gift. Thomas felt his throat tighten. He looked at the other guards, who held back tears too. Marcus stood, humble and strong. The sergeant declared the day a success, praising the guards for their readiness and honor. The banner above the gate fluttered in a warm breeze, its gold trim glinting in the light. As evening approached, the guards gathered at the base of the wall to watch the sun set behind the mountains. Thomas sat beside Marcus on a low stone bench. The sky glowed pink and orange. A bird called from a nearby tree. The air was soft and still. Thomas turned to Marcus. "Sir," he said quietly, "thank you for everything you taught me. I feel like I'm part of something bigger now." Marcus looked at Thomas, pride shining in his eyes. "You have good heart, Thomas," he said. "Remember, every guard carries a story. Some are loud, some are quiet. Never judge a man by his coat alone. Judge him by the strength in his steps and the kindness in his hands." Thomas nodded. He thought of the patch, the badge, the pin. He thought of every mock, every lesson, every moment of courage. He realized that his own tales would one day become part of the guard's living story. He would share them like Marcus had shared his. That night, the garrison held a small feast in the training hall. Long tables were set with roasted chicken, vegetables, and fresh fruits. Lanterns hung from the beams, casting a warm glow. Guards laughed and talked freely. Marcus sat at the head table with Thomas beside him. The sergeant raised a cup and gave thanks for the guards' safety and unity. He toasted Captain Marcus and his company. Glasses clinked, and the hall filled with cheers. Elena brought Thomas and Marcus each a slice of honey cake. Thomas tasted a crumb and savored the sweet warmth. Marcus smiled at the sight of Thomas's happy face and raised his own cup to him. Thomas returned the gesture, honor and gratitude shining between them. As the feast wound down, the soldiers drifted outside to watch the stars. The night was clear, and the sky sparkled. Thomas and Marcus stood side by side on the wall, looking up. Soft breeze stirred the banners. Thomas knew that every patrol and every guard duty would now carry new meaning. He felt confident and calm. Marcus put a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Come morning," he said, "we will stand watch again. But remember, tonight, you belong here." Thomas turned and smiled at Marcus. "I do," he said. "Thank you, sir." They stood in silence, two guards under the stars, bound by respect and shared stories. The garrison's heart beat strong and steady, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. And in Thomas's mind, the story of the old Tunic's patch had become a guiding light, a promise that honor lives in the courage to stand firm, the wisdom to learn from others, and the kindness to lift each other up.